Now back to our top story, the agreement reached between the government, the Greens and the Independents on a carbon tax, with the details to be announced on Sunday. Greens leader Bob Brown joined me just a short time ago from our Parliament House studio. Bob Brown, welcome to Lateline.
Thanks, Ali.
Well, we're now just days away from the official announcement of the details of the carbon tax, though we are starting to get bits and pieces. How much of the detail is signed and sealed at this stage, and how much remains to be negotiated?
Look, it's pretty well there. The essence of the package has been agreed to. Of course, there's always detail, and I suspect, we'll find little bits and pieces along the way that need to be picked up on as the package goes to Parliament and gets analysed and gets public scrutiny and then finally passes into law, hopefully later this year.
The ABC understands that in the final agreement, 7 out of 10 households will be fully compensated. If that's the case, where's the incentive for most Australians to reduce their energy use?
Well, look, the difference between our package and what Tony Abbott's putting forward is that households will be compensated. He wants to take, by the end of the decade, $720 out of each household and compensate the polluters. We want to take the money from the polluters and make sure that householders aren't out of pocket. There's a lot can be done here by householders. I would like to see, when that compensation comes along, Ali, householders using that to refurbish the energy the way the energy is handled in their houses, so that they consume less, have lower power bills.
But do you acknowledge there's no incentive? If there's full compensation for 7 out of 10 households, where's the incentive to do the sorts of things that you're just talking about?
Oh, come on, I think you're underestimating the willingness of the average Australian to A, cut their power bills, but B, play their role in reducing the energy which comes from the burning of coal and fossil fuels, and helping towards making this planet and this country and their city, their region, safer for the future. We know at stake here is the Great Barrier Reef, 67,000 jobs, a $6 billion economy. The Murray-Darling Basin, 128,000 jobs, one of the great food bowls of the world. Our ski field, 700,000 properties on the eastern seaboard alone. These are massive saves if we can move towards playing our role in safeguarding and making secure the future of future generations against the now very seriously quantified threats that scientists and economists, and Tony Abbott might believe neither of them, say our grandchildren are going to be handling.
So how long will that compensation last? In 3 years, for example, will households still be fully compensated? Will the compensation, for example, go up in line with the carbon price?
Well, on Sunday, those sort of details will be available, Ali. I don't blame you for asking me, but those details are awaiting the package on Sunday.
What about the carbon price? I can't let you go without asking you that question because, of course, Christine Milner's made it very clear that you need at least $40 a tonne just to get a move from coal to gas. Is the starting price going to be anywhere near that, and will there be an escalator built in?
Yeah, we've seen the Business Council of Australia saying $10 is where it should be. And this has all been discussed in the committee. I have said before, it's not going to be a Greens outcome. We're not in government. We have 12% of the vote and we're influencing the outcome here, but the government and the independents have been hard at work on that as well. So I'm not going to give you that figure. It will be revealed on Sunday. But
are you happy with it?
We are happy that we've got this outcome, and that just by being here, just by the Greens being in this Parliament, we are moving this nation towards a much better economic, employment and business footing for the future. This is a game changer, and a positive game changer, rather than us drifting into all the problems that the economists and the scientists tell us are coming down the line. We're not only going to be coming up with a mature outcome for Australia and joining other countries like New Zealand and most countries in Europe and many states in the United States which have schemes to deal with a carbon price. But this is an Australian outcome. It's one that I think people voted for and I think they're going to be pleased with.
But of course you could have had a game changer in 2008, but for various reasons, including in particular the fact that compensation was very generous. The Greens voted down the CPRS. They didn't vote for it. How much different is the compensation, particularly for coal, going to be this time round?
Well, if it had been left to the Greens, there wouldn't be compensation for the polluting coal industry, which is so damaging to the future of the economy. But give and take in there, and you will see that it's not off the board at all. And the coal industry is going to continue in this country. I think it'll be growing. And I think it's going to be continuing to export massive profits overseas whilst continuing to threaten, as I said, the Great Barrier Reef, much else of the rest of the Australian economy.
So is it the same as the CPRS?
I don't give you that clue either, Ali, but this is going to be a better outcome than the CPRS, if you ask me. And one of the things that we were wanting to see here was flexibility, so that we could match the rest of the world as we move into a period of international carbon trading in the future. The CPRS locked away for 15 years the flexibility we wanted to see, and I think we'll see that this is a more prospective, positive program for the future compared to the CPRS.
Just briefly, still on coal, because you say that you think the industry will continue to grow. One of your new senators, Lee Rhiannon, said just a little while ago that she talked of the coal industry actually being shut down within a decade as Australia moves to renewables. Do you support or do you agree that that decade-long time frame is realistic?
It's not going to happen. The planet is going to continue to be damaged by the pollution coming from the coal industry, and Australia per capita is one of the biggest users, and it is by a country mile the biggest exporter for many, many years to come, Ali, and the world's going to have to pay the cost of that burning of coal on this planet for many centuries to come. So, no, we're not going to be able to see the end of the coal industry in the near future.
So what do you think? Not a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades?
Well, that'll be in the wisdom of younger people coming along handling a much more damaged world through climate change than we're seeing now. We've just had last year the hottest year in recorded human history. We know the Arctic ice is melting. We're seeing the acidification of the ocean, which is threatening the barrier reef and so on, and this is going to continue, not just for decades, but for centuries. And the more coal that's burnt, the worse that gets for the future. So unfortunately, the Greens aren't able to move across to the renewables as fast as we'd like to, because there's more jobs there, there's a more prospective industry and export income in the future, but we're on the way to improving the outlook for Australia.
Petrol was one area where this was part of the give and take, as you say, that you're prepared to make a concession there. The Prime Minister says petrol will be exempted for now and for the future, but you've made the point that it's inevitable, as you put it, that, quote, all fossil fuels will pay the cost of climate change. Doesn't that raise the very specific issue of trust? The Prime Minister said no carbon tax, we have a carbon tax. The Prime Minister's saying no petrol in that carbon tax. You're saying, well, really, that's not reality.
Well, no, I'm not. I'm saying that that's not the Greens' point of view, but it is the Prime Minister's view that there will not be a price on petrol. It's Tony Abbott's point of view, although he was wrong in frightening people into thinking there'll be a 6 cent a litre rise. Wrong on that. That's troubled people for months and months, quite unnecessarily, from this most negative of opposition leaders. But the big parties are simply not going to put a price on petrol, Ali. So until and unless we see a majority of Greens return to a future parliament, the petrol exemption's going to stay there. Now, we don't think that's good policy. But because it's a fossil fuel going into that, we'd like to see fast, efficient public transport, including high-speed rail, light rail, much more electrification of our cars in this country. But those things are going to be slowed up because petrol is going to remain not subject to a carbon price. That's how the big parties want it. They're in lockstep on that, and they will prevail.
Let's have a look at the parliamentary position, because of course you now do have the balance of power in the Senate. Is it a very different game for you now? Because you started obviously as a party with an environmental platform, and now you have to really embrace policies and get unity within your party on policies across the range. Is that a far more difficult job?
No, Ali. Since the 1970s, our policies have been based on 4 pillars of social justice, peace, democracy and the environment. It's always been there. It's taking some in the media and indeed amongst our opponents some time to catch up on that. But if you look at the current program before the Senate, you'll see the Greens are again leading, along with major public opinion, on a simple issue like equal marriage. For goodness sake, both the old parties are back in last century. We're in this century. And the Greens are growing in support simply because we are on so many issues resonating with the Australian public, not least young Australians.
There are some, though, fairly sweeping policies that are part of your platform. To name just 2 from the global economic section of your policy papers: remove Australia from existing bilateral free trade agreements where possible, and support the abolition of, unless radical reform can democratise, the IMF, the World Bank and the WTO. They're fairly radical policies, aren't they, for a party that's trying to head towards mainstream?
I think democratising those international organisations would be a very good thing. We'd get a much better outcome. And I think as far as...
But you abolish them if you can't get radical reform? That's what the policy says.
No, they won't be abolished.
Then why have a policy of support the abolition of unless radical reform can democratise? That's what the policy says.
Because they ought to be reformed. But let me say this, Ali. We have a fantastic policy basis which we take to every election, and our support base grows. By the way, with international free trade agreements, which you mentioned earlier, we are now seeing the stress that a lot of small business and not least manufacturing is put under, and farmers, because we were unequal against some of the big trade organisations. Well, the United States got a much better advantage out of Labor and Liberals supporting a free trade agreement 10 years ago. There's 20 pages in that trade agreement of prohibitions on foodstuffs, agricultural produce that can go to the United States, but 0 in the other direction. If we're going to have free trade agreements, and I'm not opposed to those, let's make sure that we negotiate them a bit better so Australian farmers and small business gets a fair go.
So just a final question. Is the target to knock off one of the major parties, I assume Labor, within 50 years, as you were quoted as saying on the weekend?
Well, why not the Liberals? I think the Greens are already the true Liberal Party in Australia, if you take that word to mean what it says. And we're the Liberals, the National Party, are shedding votes to the Greens all the time. I did see the misrepresentation in the Australian on the weekend. I've never said our target is to take over the Labor Party. It is to replace the big parties, but equally the Liberals. We Greens are on the move. We are offering people an appealing choice. I've got a fantastic new team in the Parliament.
It's not the history, though, is it, of minor parties in this country? If you look at the DLP and if you look at the Democrats, both of whom, or which, have held the balance of power in the Senate. No,
it is the history. Maybe I can go back a bit further than you, and if you look at the Labor Party this time last century, they were in a very similar position to the Greens. They got government, but they didn't hold it for long. If you look at the Liberal Party in mid-last century, it grew out of smaller parties. Look, this is dynamic history. The Greens are on the move. By the way, can I add that 2/3 of our elected representatives, more than that of our staff, and a huge number of our voters are women. This is a 21st century party. I'm delighted with it.
Senator Bob Brown, many thanks for taking the time to talk to Lateline.
Thanks, Ali.